rotten. 5 adults and 1 child. What do you expect? You want memories from
Yeah,
that?
I
All
do.
right. One time, a storm came up, and we were all going to go to the cave, which was quite a ways from the house. And my Uncle Otto picked me up to carry me. And for some reason, I was scared of the cave. I don't know that I'd ever been in it, but it just didn't sound like someplace I wanted to go. So I started to cry, and I said, I don't want to go to the cave. I don't want to go to the cave. And Otto says, okay, we're all going back. We went back to the house.
Oh my. What was she like? What can you tell us about her personality?
A little grumpy.
Oh, was she?
That's the way I remember her. All business, you know, she had to get this done, she had to do this, she had to do that. Yeah.
What about your grandpa?
He was a nice, gentle soul. Yeah.
Your grandpa was an immigrant.
Yes.
What did he sound like when he talked? Did he have an accent?
He didn't have, I don't remember that he had an accent. Well, my grandma couldn't speak very much English, and she was born in the United States. She was born in Indiana. Grandpa went to school here after he came here. That's what I was told, that there were like classes at night in some of the local small school buildings to teach him English. Grandma never did. She never read or write English or German that I know of. I know not English, and I didn't think she maybe could read German either.
Did she speak German, or was it?
It was a mixture
Okay.
by the time I remember her talking.
What was the name of your, starting with your great grandparents, or in the names of
Okay, on the
each
Shookeye
side?
side, my great-great-grandparents were Gottlieb and
Wilhelmina.
Wilhelmina, thank you, Shookeye, and Reese was, ooh, I'm not sure, I'd have to look that up.
Did you know the Reeses at all?
No, not the great-grandparent. I didn't know the great-grandparent Shookeye either.
No.
The reason I remember the name is the tombstone out in the cemetery. No, you have to remember, my grandparents were old enough to be my great-grandparents when I was born, practically. So there was a big gap there. Out of all the grandchildren on the Shookeye side, I was the youngest, except for Raj and Val. So there's a big gap there in that, between my dad and Helen.
What can you tell me about your Uncle Herman or your Aunt Helen?
I don't know. He was a pleasant man. He was kind of a, joking man, and I don't know.
Okay.
The kids weren't around the adults very much. I do remember that they kept an aunt of Emma's who spoke nothing but German, or if she did speak English, you never heard it. But then Herman and Emma both could speak German. And when I would go over there and be staying with Marilyn, and we'd be around the table, they would speak German to Aunt. And Aunt would speak German to them, and then you'd hear them speaking German and looking at you. And you knew they were talking about you. But
Herman was my grandpa's oldest brother. There were about, 20 years between them?
close to 20.
Yeah.
And when Herman got married, my dad cried, I've been told. He says, I don't like that Emma. Because she was taking his Herman away.
No.
So,
But when did Helen and Reinhard and when did Walt and Elsie
I don't know.
head off in their directions?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea. I do not remember. Well, Helen and Reiner, probably when they got married, his first call was down in Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
And
Oh, I
so
didn't
they
know.
probably moved down there as soon as they were married. Walt and Elsie, I know Glenn was born here. I found that out just not too long ago when he died. But exactly when they moved to Scottsbluff, I don't know.
Do you know what Walt did out there?
I think he worked at a sugar beet factory or farm or something with sugar beets first. That I'm not sure of either.
I remember Otto coming over to the
Yeah,
house
oh
a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. Well, We had a dog, Mopsy, that hated Otto.
Mm.
I never could figure. Otto and Dick Brooks. They were the only two people that dog did not like. She would growl at him.
Huh.
So I don't know if they had maybe kicked at her or something, but she would always growl at both of them.
Well, and I,
That's
you know,
really digressing.
well, and I remember Otto coming over, and I'm just a kid, and so, you know, who knows? He didn't seem real pleasant to me.
Yeah, I can understand that, but he I don't know.
You know, but obviously I had no relationship with him as opposed to your relationship with
Right,
him.
yeah. And I had a good relationship till I got to be a teenager. And then it was different, and I could tell he didn't approve of a few things that I did, you know. And I guess at one point he said a little something to Dad, and Dad kind of chewed him out. Like, this is my kid, you know. And I don't know. That's what Mom said. I never heard any of that from Dad.
What do you know about Grace?
Very little, except that she had cancer. And these are things that my mom told me that she had heard from Grandma. She had cancer in her leg. She was a young teenager. And she had to have the leg amputated. And they were going to go to Kansas City and buy her a prosthesis, but she died. That's about as much as I remember Mom telling
And
me.
was still a teenager when she died.
Yes, quite young.
Okay.
And again, you'd have to check the tombstone to find the exact age.
I remember, believe it or not, you talking about going to Kearney to see Grandpa Shookeye.
Okay,
So at what point did he leave the farm and go to the home or wherever he was over there?
that's a long story, because first it was Grandma that got sick, Grandma Shookeye. And she had to have some surgeries, and her mind went bad. I don't know if it's Alzheimer's. Back then, they diagnosed it as hardening of the arteries in the brain. But she lived with my parents for a while, which was horrible. They both lived there for a little while, which was not good at all. And then at one point, and this was when I was older, I think I was married by then, some of the family would take turns going into their home and staying with them. And it was quite a while. And then Grandma, oh, here's a long, sad story. There were no homes as we know it now. And it finally got to the point where Grandma had to be put somewhere. And the only place that the doctors could come up with was Ingleside.
For explanation's sake, and so we can hear your definition of it. Tell whoever watches this what Ingleside is or was.
Well, Ingleside was an insane asylum, basically, way back then. Yeah,
Was it state run?
state run. And then Aunt Helen came, and she was bruised all over.
Grandma was.
Yeah, and Helen said, we can't leave her there. We can't leave her there. Well, I guess they had a hard time getting her out then. You know, once a doctor has signed for mental. But they did finally get her out, and then they found that home in Kearney, because there was just nothing around Hastings. And she went there. He didn't first. He was still on the farm with Otto. And then that got bad. And then he was back living with my mom and dad for a while. And then Mom got sick. It was a long, long, hard story. And then at a certain point, they decided he needed to go over there too.
Okay.
So
Just because he was old and needed the help, he didn't have problems.
he
like
didn't have
Grandma
any.
did.
No, he
Okay.
didn't have any mental problems. No, but you know, he was. I don't know, what was he? 90 or. I'm not sure what he would have been at that point, because he didn't die until. Actually, I think I was pregnant with Jody when he died.
Tell me about your grandma and grandpa marching.
I was always in awe of Grandpa. He scared me a little bit, not because he was stern or anything. He was so intelligent that bothered me a little bit. you know, and he was a preacher. we would have holiday meals with them, and the adults were all around the big dining room table, and the kids were in the kitchen around the table. And they'd say, our, Grandpa would start to pray, and we'd sit there and say, and it would go on and on and on and on. And even when I was older, I would stay with Eva and Vernie in the summertime sometimes and go to church with them. And Grandpa was retired then, but the pastor there would say, Brother Martin, will you lead us in prayer? And I'd say, no.
Now, when you say the family would get together for holiday meals,
Mhm.
that family was spread out all over the country.
Well, this was just the family that was around the
Okay.
area, yeah. Not the boys, well, and not Rosalie.
Right. So, what kind of relationships did you have with the boys and with Rosalie because they were so far away?
Didn't see them very often, not much relationship until I was older, actually, although I remember Dwight sending us kids gifts when he was in the service. And one thing that always stayed in my mind was on Grandma's porch hung her flag with her 4 stars on. The blue flag that showed there were 4 service men in the family. And that always kind of impressed me. I always remembered that. But other than that, no, they were gone. They weren't around much
Okay.
from the time they graduated high school on, and I was really young when they graduated high school.
Yeah.
So,
And did Rosalie leave
yeah,
like that, too?
yeah,
Okay.
she left. Well, I was probably a baby. I don't know exactly when they moved away.
Okay, you talked about being in awe of your grandpa. What about your grandma?
Grandma was just a sweet little old lady who was constantly busy. I don't remember interacting with her hardly at all. She was always busy pleasing Grandpa, and busy, busy, busy. So,
And that would have been in the 1950s or 60s or
40s,
40s.
probably, and early 50s, yeah. Because now I'm trying to think when they passed away. You were probably about 4 years old when Grandpa died. And
Yeah.
Grandma was quite a bit later.
Yeah, I wanted to say Grandma was about 65 or so. I remember Grandma.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
I don't remember him at all.
No, you wouldn't, no.
I remember Grandma, but again, like you say, it was family things there, and this little white-haired woman
Oh, yeah,
off in the kitchen.
yeah,
And obviously, you had 2 aunts in the area
yeah.
that you knew very
Mhm.
well. Tell us about them.
Well, I would go in the summertime once in a while and stay with Eva for maybe a week, something like that. And I just remember going home and saying to Mom, Eva doesn't make as many dishes dirty as you do, because it was my job to wash dishes wherever I was. But then later in life, I realized my mom was a better cook, too, than Eva was, and so...
And were you if you went out to stay with them, were you and Elaine close?
I have always felt close to Elaine, but she was quite a bit older. I don't even know that she was still at home when I went to stay with them. I'm sure she wasn't. She worked in Hastings for a while after she graduated. So, but I do remember they used to live in a little house south of Holstein at one time, and I remember being down there when she was dating a couple of guys, and they would be in the living room sitting more in the dark, and the adults would all be in the other room, and I was in the living room sitting on the couch with them. So
Being the pesky little cousin?
I was the pesky little cousin, I'm sure. Yeah.
How about Vashti?
Don't remember too much about her at all. They lived at Hardy when they were first married. And I do remember Marguerite, their oldest daughter, came and stayed at mom and dad's a week in the summer now and then. Donna would go and stay with Evan Verney. I don't know why they did that. You know, why that exchange went on, but it did. And Marguerite would come and stay with us.
Tell me about those cousins.
Pardon?
Tell me about those cousins, Vashta's kids.
Marguerite?
All of them, all three of them.
Okay, Marguerite was, well, Donna was about 4 years older than I was. Marguerite would have been a couple years older than that, and Gary was a year younger than I was.
And they all died young?
They all died fairly young. Marguerite was an alcoholic. And I say young, but she was married and her kids were grown before she died. But Donna died of cancer and Gary died of cancer. Gary was in the Navy on one of the ships that was out close to what were the islands where they were doing some atomic testing.
Oh, like Bikini or something like that?
Yeah, it wasn't Bikini,
Okay.
Atoll or something, yeah. But anyway, they don't know whether that's where he got the cancer or not, but he died of cancer and Donna died of cancer. And they were all probably 30s, 40s, something like that.
How about other cousins on the Marchand side?
Never knew them. I did when they were real little,
Okay.
you know.
Well, I was going to say, you knew Karen well enough to have her in your wedding.
I knew Karen and Joellen better than any of the others because they came up oftener from Kansas City. They lived the closest. And they would come up to Grandma and Grandpa's quite often. So I knew them. Dwight's kids, I saw them several times when they were real young. Didn't really know them. Tom died in Vietnam.
I remember the night you got that phone call.
Yeah. And, but, you know, the rest of them never really knew him. Before my eyes went bad, I was on Facebook with one of his daughters, and that's how I found out that Dwight had died.
Mm.
She posted it on Facebook, and I wrote back, I said, when I was a young girl, I thought my Uncle Dwight was the best looking guy I'd ever seen, and he was. My mom was a wonderful person. I probably didn't think as much of that as I should have. Nobody does, but she was. She was, and especially in her old age, I really began to appreciate it because she was not a complainer then. She had been younger, but definitely as we dealt with all of her problems in old age, she never complained. She was just always, okay, that's, well, whatever, you know, so, yeah.
What about your dad?
Dad, you know, he was kind of a, well, I can't say quiet person. He wasn't necessarily quiet, but he could become very introspective, what if that's the word. Something would happen that, I don't know if he and Mom had arguments or what happened, but he would eat his meal, leave, go out, bed, whatever, and we'd hardly see him for a couple days. And then all at once everything was fine, but he was a very generous man, very, very generous with us kids, yeah. Very giving and very loving. But, I can't complain about it. But I did notice that I think a lot of guys are that way. They'd just rather go off than argue.
You play with? What'd you play with?
Well, we're out in the middle of the country,
Right.
you know. There are no neighbors as such. I don't remember. Probably my cousin Marilyn was my first playmate, and that was only at things where the family got together. At that time, anyway. I don't know.
Were there many of those kinds of days where the family got together?
I think quite often, yeah. Hmm. When we lived there, Ruth lived about a mile away, Ruth Blessing, and we would, our mothers would talk, and we would get together, and they'd say, okay, Phyllis is leaving, Ruth is leaving, and we would actually walk to the corner, meet at the corner, and then go to one or the other's houses. And, nobody let kids do that now, but 4 years old, 5 years old, something like that. And get together and have a play date. We didn't call them play dates back then. So, yeah. Then about 4th grade, I think, Ruth had bouts of appendicitis and missed a lot of school, and she got set back a grade. From then on, I was alone in my grade.
We've kind of covered the first part of this. Your best friend then, your best friend now.
Well, my best friend when I was real little was Ruth Blessane. Then it became Avalon, and then it became Joanne. And now, I don't know what to tell you now. After your dad died, Marianne Steinkrieger, who I had known before, but suddenly we were 2 widows together. We did a lot of things together, and she became my best friend till she moved away to McCook and then died. Can't say I have one now.
Tell us about Joanne, since you brought her up.
Well, Joanne wasn't my best friend early. Avalon was. When they lived there at Dieterding's place, as I call it, we were just a mile apart, and we were together a lot. And our folks were together a lot. And we were really good friends. And then when they had to move up north, she was maybe in the 8th grade, I'm not sure. That all kind of changed. And then I started high school, and that's when Joanne became my best friend.
Can you map out the family connection, how you and Joanne are related?
Joanne's dad and dad were cousins. Yeah.
So they weren't far from you.
About a mile around the corner.
At that place. Okay.
Yeah, we used to get together. One summer, Gary stayed with us all summer. He was supposed to help Dad. My cousin Gary.
Fair,
yeah. And we went over to Joanne's because they had a pasture and a creek. And we all went down wading in the creek, and Gary decided to dive in. Well, the creek's only about this. That's this much of water. He came up with mud all over his face. So. That was the summer we took him to Colorado with us. We went to Colorado that summer, and Gary went with us. That was fun.
Do you remember, what can you tell us about that trip? What did you see? Where did you go? What did you do?
Well, we went to Estes Park, went through Big Tom Canyon first and up Estes Park, and we stayed in a cabin up in Estes Park, and the name of the cabin was Damfino. and Gary slept on a porch, and then Mom didn't sleep all night because Gary was a sleepwalker, and when you went out the door of the porch, you went right down to the river. The rest of the trip, I'm not sure where we went. We went up through Trail Ridge Road and up into the mountains and probably just back around. But we stopped one place, and Gary disappeared over the hill, and pretty soon he came back. He had pulled up a sapling tree. We took it home, planted it, and it grew. So it was kind of a fun trip, though, because the 3 of us, Raj and Gary and I, were in the back seat, and Val was pretty little, and so she was up front with the folks, and the boys kept goosing her.
Oh.
And she was like, "Mom, make them stop." And Mom would turn, "What are you guys doing?" "Nothing. We aren't touching her, you know."
So Gary was a bit older than Raj.
Yeah, he was just a year younger than me.
Okay.
So that was kind of a fun summer.
Yeah.
What did you think about Roger when he got into
I
your
don't
life?
remember. I honestly do not have any memory of that. That's terrible, but I don't. I probably just ignored him like big siblings tend to do sometimes. I don't know.
But there, I assume, came a point where he was old enough to bother you or play with you.
Oh,
or
yeah, a little bit, yeah. But, there's, 5.5 years difference in our ages, so playing together really didn't work. Well, we fought like brother and sister a lot of the times. But as adults, and especially after your dad died, he was so helpful to me. Very helpful. He was there for me. Yeah.
What about Val?
Well, I took care of Val quite a bit because, you know, the difference in our ages. I was 11 when she was born, so by the time she was walking and stuff, I was 12. And, yeah, I reminded her, of course, she didn't remember it. We were in Holstein one time, and I had her. But she was older then, I don't know, maybe 4, well, probably about 4. And there was an older guy there that was just, you know, kind of teasing me and this and that. And at one point, she just walked up and punched him in the stomach. And she didn't remember it. I reminded her of it. But, you know, she was very young when I left home. So I don't have many memories after that point of her.
Okay.
And then by the time she finished her first year of college, I think it was her first year, she moved to Arizona.
How and when did you meet Dad?
Well, you want to know how he became a teacher?
All right, let's start with
All
that.
right. Back then, a lot of the high schools offered what they called normal training classes, your junior and senior year, which were supposed to prepare you to go out and teach in little country schools, not in town schools, which used to make me angry because I said the country kids are just as good as the town kids and they need the same qualified teacher. But he was kind of a lazy student, and somebody told him those were really easy classes. It wasn't that he wanted to be a teacher. That's what he told me anyway. And so he took that, and he said that one day these 3 men came driving into his parents' yard and talked to his parents about whether he would want to teach school in this country school. And he got signed up. So I was in the 8th grade the first time I saw him. He came to visit one day. And that was when Audrey was teaching and was trying to get me ready for 8th grade exams. She kept saying, you're way behind, you're way behind. We need to get you. And it kind of scared me because I thought, you mean they won't let me in high school if I don't pass my 8th grade exams? So I'd been staying in at recess and working on those warps study books. And then he came to visit, and I thought, okay. And Audrey dismissed the kids for recess, and everybody went out, and I stayed. And she said, you go out too, Phyllis. I said, well, I was going to stay. You go out too. That was the first time I saw him.
But you were out, gone and going to school in Holstein.
Yeah.
Then when he was teaching.
He did come to the closing program that year. I did see him sitting out in the audience. Didn't talk to him or anything. But yeah, by the time he came to teach, I was in high school.
Okay. So when did it obviously become more than he's over here, you're over there? And...
very gradually. We were a group. We were a bunch of kids. By staying at Lamont Borger's parents' home, he and Lamont and then Harold Lassine were together a lot. Because a lot of the kids that he had known in Blue Hill had moved on to college, jobs, whatever. He went home on weekends, but through the week he was around, and then he started staying more weekends too. And he came to what we called Walther League, the young people's group, and we were just all together.
Okay.
I don't know when it progressed. I can tell you when it really started to progress was after Joanne graduated and moved to Hastings, because then it was just him and I.
Well, don't say it happened by default.
Well, no, not necessarily, but Joanne went with us a lot when we went out to do something, movie or whatever. But, he'd drop her off first and then take me home last. And so, and then after that, it was just the two of us.
You mentioned earlier today, you talked about in-laws. What was his relationship with your folks? What was your relationship with his folks?
Well, his relationship with my folks was probably a little closer because he had lived in the community, been involved with the church for a year before we really kind of not became a couple, but became, a little more involved. I only saw, he invited me and took me to a lot of family things, but not just with his folks, and we were fine. We were fine. I started having these pains, and we started timing, and when I got to a certain point, I said, well, that's just what the book says. I think we should go, So we get there, and they enter me, and I said to the nurse, I said, I'm not sure. This is my first time, so I'm not sure. I'm just kind of guessing. Oh, she said, I think you're probably about ready. Okay, well, here I am, 36 hours later. And I was having pain off and on all that time. And I didn't call and tell my mom that we were going. I did not want to tell her. 35 hours later, my dad shows up at the hospital because Mom was trying to call, and nobody answered. So I was told. I didn't see him, but your dad talked to him in the hall. And so the last time the doctor came in, he examined, he says, it's going to be quite a while yet. And I guess I started crying or something. And he examined it again. He says, oh. He said, all right, get her into delivery. And you were an instrument baby. He took you by instrument then. And I don't know how long he would have let me lay there otherwise. But they evidently really sedated me heavily. Because I come to a lot later, and I'm in a ward with 4 other women, and your dad's not there. And nobody's there. There's no nurses. There's nothing. And finally, I laid there for quite a while, and I said to one of the other women, does anybody know what I had? Well, I think maybe you had a boy, but I'm not sure. And okay. And very naive, first-time mother. Okay. So I just laid there and waited. Nurse came in, and I said, could I see my baby? She said, well, we brought him to you. I said, I don't remember it. So they went and got you and brought you back, and I held you and fussed over you and counted your toes and fingers and all that stuff for quite a while. And then they took you, and then about that time your dad came, and I chewed him out something terrible. I felt so bad. I said, you just went off and left me. He said, I was so tired I couldn't stay awake anymore. He said, you were awake. I told you I was leaving. And I still have no memory of that. And the nurses said, we brought you your baby. You held him and everything. No memory at all.
Oh, wow.
To this day, I have no memory of that.
So was it easier with Jody?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, yes and no. Okay, yes and no. Because I was starting to have those pains, and it was around noon, and I said to your dad, I'm eating lunch, because if this is 36 hours, I'm not going to go hungry again for that long. So I ate lunch. Big mistake. 3 hours later, they were giving me the ether. I came to barfing all over the place. But yeah, it was 3 hours versus 36. I don't know why. Well, from what the doctor said, you returned not a what do they call it? Breach. But you were turned face-wise. You were coming face up instead of face down, which it should be. And somebody, not the nurse or the doctor, somebody else told me later that there's a chance of the breathing being cut off coming that way. And I think that's what he did with the instruments, probably turned you. You had a little bit of scarring here on one cheek, and from the instruments. So
Well, what stands out to you the most as far as Scott as a child, and what stands out to you the most as Jody as a child?
Scott was smart from the day he was born.
Ah,
He picked up on things so easily, and he just very, I don't know. He was reading before he got to kindergarten, and that's why they jumped him a grade. She came to the house, the teacher did one time, to talk to us, and I wasn't totally in favor of it. Your dad was, because he had been jumped a grade, and he thought that was terrific. Well, I could see the pros and cons, and I just didn't know for sure whether that was the thing to do or not. But they did it. Her rationale was the teacher you would have had next would not have given you any extra work or anything, and you would have gotten bored very easily, and you would have just sloughed off.
well, what about Jody?
What was the original question?
Well, give us one
Jody-
one thing you want.
Oh, well, Jody was a very shy baby even. She didn't like men. She liked her dad and her grandpas, but any other men, she just didn't want anything to do with them. And she was pretty shy and quiet. And I don't know.
How was she in school?
How was she
She-
in school?
Oh, well, she did well in school. She wasn't as advanced as Scott was, but she did well. Yeah, I'm sure she was very well behaved.